I'd like to read and explain the 21st chapter of the 5th division of Bhagavad Purana. And there are a number of things that you'll get from this. One thing is there's some very relevant concepts for astrological theory here. Another thing is that this would, I hope, counteract the uninformed or shallow opinion that the Puranas are religious books and fairy tales and faith books and things like that. And a third thing is that you would get a working example of a theoretical observational construct in astronomy, because this is going to describe imaginary things to calculate real things. So the Bhagavatam's narrator, Shukdev Goswami, says, I have described an approximation of the observable characteristics of the circle of existence. So that's what this stuff is. First of all, it's an approximation. And it's also an approximation of observable characteristics. He's not talking about things that you can't observe from Earth. That's not the type of astronomy that the Puranas are involved with. They're involved in the stuff that you can see in the heavens. And it describes that sort of astronomy. And it's called, he says, I've described an approximation of the observable characteristics of the circle of existence. That's called the Bhu-Valaya, which is, you can translate as, a Valaya is also like a bracelet. So it's like this circle of Bhu. And Bhu means the place where things exist. And it's the circle because it is not a shape, but it's a circle because it's an eternal principle. Now, in the second text, Shukdev says, I've explained the measurements of the upper half of this circle. This is in the previous chapters. And the upper half of the circle is the heavens. Experts say that one can understand the second part of anything by understanding the first half, or vice versa. So what he's saying is the principles that he gave for the upper part of the circle of existence, which are the heavens, are the same principles that operate in the lower half. And specifically, he's speaking about there's 7 different divisions. There's different aspects of these upper and lower places. That's a different topic. Let's put that aside for now. He goes on and he says, between the celestial half and the earthly half, there is local space. So he says that there's a circle in which all things exist. The upper half of the circle is the heavens. The lower half of the circle is the earth. In between them is something called antariksha, which is local space. And then in the third text he says, in the middle of local space, so now the local space is in the middle of the circle, and in the middle of the middle is the sun. In the middle of this local space lies the sun, the divine master of radiance, which warms and illuminates the 3 realms with its own splendor. What are these 3 realms? Triloka, the upper half, the lower half, and the middle. Bhu is the bottom half where things exist. Bhuva is the antariksha, the middle space, and then Swa is the upper portion. The sun is going to illuminate and warm all of them because it's in the middle space, so it's contacting the upper space and the lower space and the middle space. Now he says there, in its middle space, and this is the part that's quite relevant to astrology, he attains different states by, he means the sun. The sun attains different states by rising towards a high point, falling to a low point, and moving through the midpoint, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, and sometimes even-paced. This movement to the highest, lowest, and middle points, Shukadev says, defines the passage of time and is the basis of defining the zodiac signs, Capricorn, etc. Those explicitly mentioned the signs, Makara, Tishu, the signs Capricorn, and so forth. It also causes the days and nights to increase, decrease, or equalize, which in turn affects weather and all these things. So this is an explicit mention of zodiac, right? And this is where, if you now think about what this means, he's saying that the sun rises to a high point. That's talking about moving towards the Uttara. It's called, in this specific text, it's called Udakayana. So from its lowest point to its highest point, it goes to Udakayana. And then from its highest point to its lowest point, it's Dakshinayana. And then the two midpoints are called Vishuvat. The word Vishuvat is also used for the equator, and that's your hint about what's going on here. The sun moves north and south of the equator, from the high point to the Uttara, Udak, which means north, Dakshin, which means south. And then it has Vishuvat when it's on the equator. So this is talking about the sun's movement north and south of the equator, which is tropical measurement of movement of the sun. Tropical means, the Tropic of Capricorn, the Tropic of Cancer, the equator. That's the Udakayana, the Dakshinayana, and the Vishuvat. So he goes up and down through those, and that defines the passage of time and is the basis for defining the zodiac signs. That time is not different from astrology. Some people say that the tropical zodiac is just for making a calendar or for telling when the seasons are going to happen, as if time was not a part of karma. Time is defined in the Bhagavatam, in the third canto, and throughout all the Vedic Shastra. Time is defined as the Shakti, which allows the cause to create its effect. So without time, the deeds don't bear fruit. The karmas don't happen. Time is the conveyor belt on which karma transpires. So the knowing of time is the knowing of karma. And that's why the observance of the celestial bodies, which indicate time, tell you about destiny and karma. So it's meaningless to say that this tropical zodiac is only for telling time. Only for telling time means telling karma. And that's why here, Shukadeva Goswami says, this is the basis, the sun's movement north and south of the equator is the basis for knowing the time of the year, and for doing astrology. It's the basis of the zodiac signs beginning from Makara, Capricorn. Beginning from, because we're going to hear he's thinking beginning from Udakayana. And he says that the noticeable quality here is that it causes the days and nights to increase, decrease, or equalize. As if you're in the north, which is where the speaker is, the speaker Shukadeva Goswami is in India, on the bank of the Ganga River. So as the sun moves north of the equator, your days are going to get longer, the amount of light is going to increase, and the shadows are going to decrease. And as the sun moves south of the equator, the opposite is going to happen. So this is what he says in the next texts. When the sun enters Aries or Libra, then the days and nights equalize. As it moves through the 5 zodiac signs headed by Taurus, the daylight expands and then recedes by about 24 minutes month by month. 24 minutes is a ghatika, an old measurement. Most of these things are in old measurements and have to be translated. When the sun enters the 5 zodiac signs headed by Scorpio, then the days and nights change in the opposite manner. Daylight expands until the sun reaches its highest point. Night expands until the sun reaches its lowest point. So the sun moves over the equator at Aries. That's where it's equal. Days and nights will be equal, or shadow. You can measure this by measuring the length of days and nights, or by measuring the movement of a shadow at noon. So at Aries, it'll be equal, and then from Taurus onwards, you'll lose a ghatika every month. You'll lose the ghatika, which is 24 minutes, month by month, until it gets to its most northern point. You'll lose a ghatika of nighttime until it gets to its most northern point. And then when it gets to its most northern point, it will start to recede again. So then you'll start losing daytime until it gets to Libra. The northern point is the beginning of Cancer. Then when it gets to Libra, you'll get, again, equal days and nights. And then when it enters Scorpio, it's going to do the opposite. it's going to lose daytime until it gets down to its southernmost point, which is the beginning of Makara, Capricorn. And then it's going to recede again. The loss of daytime will recede again. So you'll start gaining daytime, losing night again, until it gets back to Aries, where it's equal again. So there you go. There you have the zodiac described in terms of the movement of the sun north and south of the equator. Now you can say, okay, well, here it's described this way, but elsewhere it's described other ways, but elsewhere it's not described other ways. There's no other place where it says the zodiac, it begins from this star and ends at that star. It might say, in the next chapter of the Bhagavatam, you'll hear it say that the nakshatras Ashwini align with the Mesha, Aries. Now here, in this 21st chapter, the zodiac was described. Then in the next chapter, 22, the stars are going to be described. And then it's going to tell you about the correspondence between the two. Let's continue. The sun covers 95.1 million yojana. Now, what's a yojana? I know you want to know that, right? A yojana is a big measure. We don't know exactly what it is because these measurements are based on sizes of things which are different from individual to individual. Like we say a foot. We have a foot, right? In British units, there's a foot. What is a foot? Well, it got standardized to be 12 inches. Well, what's an inch supposed to be? It's supposed to be something like that. Well, the old Indian system was like that also. So a yojana is somewhere probably between, I think it's 12 and 14 kilometers. So let's say it's 12. So okay, so the sun covers 95.1 million yojana every day by revolving around an imaginary point. This is an imaginary point. A lot of people, they're building a Vedic planetarium in Mayapur, India, the Hare Krishna people, ISKCON people. But they're taking all these imaginary points as if they're not imaginary points. Not as if they're not constructs to understand the movement of observable things, but if they were in and of themselves the real things. So that's going to look like a fairy tale. And that's why people would think that these Puranas are talking about stuff that's wacky. It's not wacky, it's trying to describe to you a mathematical principle and how to define formulas to calculate things that are real. So it says the sun covers 95.1 million yojana by revolving around an imaginary point called the center. That's Meru. Meru means the center. In an imaginary circumference, an imaginary means theoretical. Manasa, that's the word used here. It's a theoretical, it's a mental construct, imaginary thing. So the imaginary circumference is called the Manasa Uttaragiri, the mountain beyond imagination. Or you have the Meru, which is your first imaginary construct, theoretical point, the center of the earth. And then you have the second one, the Uttara, the second point of imagination. And that's the circumferential point. So the circumferential point is going to move around the center point. And the circumference is 95.1 million yojana, which is about 1 billion kilometers, which is about the size of the Earth's orbit around the sun, incidentally. It's not wacky or far out. There's a center, and the sun is going around it, and okay, this is geocentric. So the Puranas are wrong because it's not geocentric. Well, no, the Puranas are not wrong. It is geocentric, and it's also heliocentric, depending on your point of view. Motion is always relative. If you're on a sidewalk, then the car is moving forward. If you're in the car, then the person on the sidewalk is moving backwards. And those are both accurate observations of what's going on. So the Puranas are not talking about an abstract astronomy, but they're talking about a practical astronomy, standing on Earth and observing, and how to calculate. They're not talking about what's really there, but they're talking about how to calculate what's really there. Okay, so now it says to the east of this central mountain is Indra's abode, called the abode of light. Here, the sun rises and inspires people to pursue their goals. So to the east, you have this place called the abode of light, because the sun is going to rise in the east. So that we're talking about, this is making it more clear what this center is. It's the center of the earth. Meru is the center of the earth. To the east of it is Devatani, the abode of Deva, the abode of light. It also means the abode of gods, but gods are the beings of light, Deva, Deepa. So that's because in the east the sun rises. So it's called the abode of light. And what happens? Light comes out, the sun comes out, and people get inspired to pursue their goals. To the south of Meru is Yama's abode. Now, it's named the judge's court, Samyamani. And here the sun reaches midday. So south, we're talking about a statement being made by Shukdev Goswami in India. If you're in the northern hemisphere and you look south, you'll be looking towards the sun's zenith. Because the sun's zenith will always be to the south unless you're south of the equator. So south, in astrological terms, northern hemisphere specific, always refers up. This thing, this principle, has to be hemisphere inverted if you're in the southern hemisphere, this one principle. Okay, so to the south, if you're in the southern hemisphere, then Yama's abode would be to the north of you. To the south is Yama's abode. It's called the judge's court. It's because it's the open court. It's where the business happens. It's up in the sky. And this is where people work. Then to the west is Varuna's place. And Varuna's place is named Nimlochani, which means the twilight, where the light becomes dim. Here the sun sets, inspiring people to relax and desist from their ambitions. And to the north, which now is down, if you are in India or anywhere in the northern hemisphere and you look north, you'll be looking towards the sun's lowest point. To the north is Soma's abode, named darkness. That's called Vibhavari. Here the sun reaches midnight. Then in the 8th text, it's going to explain more what this center point is. Those who live near the central point always have warm weather. Boom. Now we know what this is. It's talking about the equator. Because the sun always rises high into the sky. Though the sun moves with the center to the left, counterclockwise, in reference to the zodiac, it moves with the center to the right, clockwise, in reference to the earth over the course of a day. Seems impossible, but it's not. The sun moves through the stars with the Meru to its left, so in a counterclockwise way. But over the course of a day, it moves to the right, clockwise, with Meru to the right, clockwise. So it's just that there's two motions happening at the same time. In the modern model, we'll say the Earth is spinning and revolving at the same time. So you get a motion of the sun is moving one direction against the stars, and the stars and the sun are moving in another direction against the horizon. So here's a star, and here's the sun. It's moving counterclockwise, but this whole thing, gradually over the course of a year, but that whole thing is going to zoom this direction every day. And that's what this double movement is all about. Now here's an amazing point. From here on, I hope you're still with me, but from here on, it's going to make a point. The Bhagavatam is going to make a point which is going to deny the assertion that Bhagavatam believes in the flat earth theory. It's going to show that Bhagavatam holds a global earth theory, perhaps as well as a flat earth theory, because as I said, it's talking more about what's real and practical, and the earth is flat. It's flat. I'm not rolling off to the side, because the roundness of it is so big, and we are so small, it's essentially flat. So when you're speaking in a certain context, you describe it as flat. And when you speak in a bigger context, physically bigger context, you describe it as round. So listen to this. This following thing can only be true if the earth is thought of as round. So when the sun appears to rise at one point, a person on the opposite diameter from that point would see it set. So here the word diameter is used. Diameters are used for circles. So the earth is not a flat thing, but it's a circle. And people are along the outside of this circle. And if you are at a point where you're seeing the sun set, and if you are at the opposite point of that, the opposite diameter, diametrically opposite point, then you would be seeing the sun set. That's why there's different time zones. When you're in Japan, the sun rises, but at that same time when you're in New York, the sun is setting, more or less. When the sun appears to rise at one point, a person on the opposite diameter from that point would see it set. Where it makes people work and sweat at midday, at the opposite diameter, it is invisible and makes people sleep and rejuvenate at midnight. That's also important. It's invisible. It's not just dim. And it doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. It does not exist. It just becomes invisible because it's on the other side of this circular thing with the diameter. It moves from Indra's place to Yama's place, a distance of 285.3 million kilometers in 6 hours. Just going fast. At the same speed, it goes from there to the places of Varuna and Soma and then returns to Indra's place. So in other words, it's going all around in the course of 24 hours. But this is talking about the rotational movement, the daily movement of the sun. And then it also has this course of a year, which we're going to find out about also in the upcoming texts. Now it says the planets headed by the moon and all the stars in the circle of lights rise and set along with the sun. So everything also, the whole sky moves around the earth with the earth kept on its right in a clockwise manner. Because we're standing on the earth and the earth is spinning. So that's why it appears that everything in the world is spinning around us. Everything in the universe, we have to say these days. The sun's chariot, essential to the three worlds, seems to revolve through these 4 points at a speed of roughly 14,170 kilometers per second. Now he's going to talk about the year. That chariot has one wheel. It has one wheel, and that wheel is a year. So it's a strange chariot, right? It only has one wheel. So how is it standing up? Because this wheel is affixed to an axle. And this axle on one end is affixed to the top of that imaginary center point, Meru. Now this is geometry. This is geometry. It's explaining to you trigonometry here, I believe. So it's saying you got a wheel where the sun moves, and then there's an axle, a line going from that wheel to the center point of the earth. That's why it only needs one wheel, because the other one's on top of a mountain. And why does it move? Because the other side of the axle is fastened to that point beyond imagination, the circumferential point. So the axle is affixed to a center point and then a circumferential point, and the circumferential point is moving, so this wheel goes around it. That's your visualization of it for geometrical purposes of how to calculate where it's going to be when. The movement of the circumferential point enables the sun god's chariot wheel to act like a grinding mill, revolving around a central point. So this is just like a grinding mill. There's one wheel, and there's something like a bull on the outside moving this wheel around a center point. It describes the wheel also, which is a clarification or reference to the same thing mentioned in Rig Veda. And it says this wheel is a year, and it has 12 spokes. It's made of the constituents of a year. So it's made of 12 spokes, 6 segments, and a threefold hub. So this is just the different portions of a year. At the hub, it has these 3 segments, which it's tempting to say that this is from one fire sign to the next, because you get these 3 4-month periods. And then beyond these 3 hubs, there are 12 spokes. And those are the 12 months, which are also the 12 zodiac signs. And then they're fixed to 6 segments of a rim. And those 6 segments of the rim are the 6 seasons. Yes, India and the Vedas don't count 4 seasons, they count 6 seasons. The 6th season has spring, but instead of spring doesn't begin with the equinox. Spring is centered on the equinox. And this is similar to Babylonian year. The spring is centered on the equinox, and then the next season will be hot. And then the next season after that is rain. And then the next season after that is the autumn. But that, again, the autumn doesn't begin from an equinox. It's equalized on the equinox. It's got the equinox in the middle. And after the autumn, you'll get cold, and then after that, frozen or snowy. So those are their 6 seasons. Then it says there's a second axle, 1/4 the length of the original, and it's attached to the first, like as in a grinding mill. The upper end of this vertical axle is fastened to the north celestial pole, Dhruva. So far we've been talking about, here's the center point, and here's an axle, here's the sun's wheel, and here's this bull, this imaginary circumferential point that moves the thing in a circle around the center. But now it's saying this center point has its own axle, which goes up like this, and it's 1/4 of the length of this one. So now you can calculate the trigonometry of the thing. I think it's called trigonometry. You can calculate the triangle. There's also a line from here to here. Now, this is going up to the north celestial pole, which is crucial for all of the coordinate systems, the north celestial pole. And this is hinting at least that the angle of this axle has a wobble to it. It's like a grinding mill like this. So there's a differentiation between the tropical zodiac of these months and the stars in the background. So now it starts to talk about the size of the sun, or the size of the sun's chariot. The interior of the chariot carrying the divine sun is approximately 43 million kilometers long and 10 million wide. So this is enormous. It's much bigger than what we measure the sun to be. Okay, the interior of the chariot is 43 million and 10 million wide. 7 horses named for the Vedic poetic meters are yoked to a bridge the same size, 10 million kilometers wide, 40 million kilometers long, and driven by Aruna. So the sun's chariot is driven by a person named Aruna. Aruna means redness. And the reason why it's driven by redness is because when the redness always precedes the sun. At the dawn, there's redness first, then the sun comes up. And at the twilight, there's redness first, and then the sun goes down. Now, in the next text, it says, although in front of Savitur, the sun god, Aruna always looks back towards him as he drives the chariot. So this means that there's also redness behind the sun for some time. So the sun, after the sun goes down, for example, there's still redness in the sky afterwards. And that's illustrated here by Aruna, the redness not only being in front of the sun, but also looking towards the back. Then it says 60,000 feminine beams of light, centimeters in breadth, shine forth in front of Surya. So Surya is illuminating with these rays of light, and they're his Shakti. So they're feminine. They shine forth in the front of Surya like sages. They speak eloquent praises. So now the sun is getting worshipped by its own light. Besides these 60,000 rays of light, there are 14 others consisting of a couple, a pair, and usually this means a man and a wife, from each of 7 groups: sages, celestial musicians, Gandharvas, celestial dancers, Apsaras, dragons, the Nagas, nature spirits, the Yakshas, and ferocious beings, the Rakshas, and finally the 7th is the Devas, the gods. So a couple from each of those groups come to worship the divine Surya, the soul of all named things, referring to him by specific names and performing specific ceremonies in specific months. This is saying that the names of the months are different. There's different names of the months because the names of the month have different qualities. This is not talking about the names of the zodiac signs. Those were named previously, earlier in the chapter. But the sun himself also has various names in each month because he causes different kinds of weather. The Vishnu Purana explains in this same point that these guys, these different people who come forward, these 14, they cause different kinds of snow and rain and different kinds of weather. Then there's a 19th text, but this 19th text, to me, it seems that it might have been tacked on, or it might be unnecessary. It's just recounting the sizes of things. So I won't bother to read that one here. Okay, so there. I think that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you can see a couple of things. One, that things can be described visually as a theoretical construct to help you understand the actual principles. You don't have to think that the sun is tied to a stick that's tied to the middle of the earth. But that stick represents a line that's essential for calculating where the sun is. And that stick, it's a force of gravity, or it is something, but it's not a stick. Okay? So you don't have to take the Puranas literally, but that doesn't mean that they don't have literal application and meaning, practical and literal application and meaning. Just like you have a mathematical theory, it's a theory, but it describes an actual tangible reality. So I hope that you can see that. I hope you can see that the Puranas speak about astronomy in great detail. This is just one chapter in the 5th division. So they're not irrelevant. And I hope that you can see this tropical definition of the zodiac in more context now. Oh, thank you.